Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The House is trying to give the rule of two more legal weight, even as it pushes agencies to move faster on acquisition. One effort tightens expectations, the other opens the system up. Former GSA Administrator Emily Murphy is here to walk us through what these changes might mean for the daily work of buying for the government. Emily, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's wonderful being with you, Terry.
When you and I talk contracting, we often talk about rules and regulations in the administrative side. Today, I thought we'd tackle some legislation for something different. There are a couple of pieces of legislation that are working their way through Congress. Let's start with what might be coming out of the House Small Business Committee, trying to put the rule of two into statute instead of having it in regulation. So step back for a minute and tell us, why are they trying to do that and why would it matter?
So the rule of two is actually sort of a compromise provision. It says that if something is suitable, or if there are two or more small businesses that can compete for something at a fair and reasonable price, you're supposed to set it aside for small business. And that was something that was regulatorily derived from Section 15 of the Small Business Act years ago. And 15 says actually you're supposed to set aside for small business anything where it could help the industrial base or where they decide it's in the best interest of the country. It has a very, very broad aperture of what could be set aside for small business or should be. So that rule of two was a regulatory compromise reached many years ago. But then there was some concern when the RFO process was happening last year. And you saw the small business community getting more and more concerned with, are they going to preserve the rule of two? Is it going to continue to exist? And so I think that this legislation is HR 2804, Protecting Small Business Competitions Act of 2025, came out of that fear. And it's an attempt to go in and just codify that the rule of two is the rule of two, that we will set things aside for small business if there are two or more small businesses. Now, the interesting thing is, as introduced by Congresswoman Velasquez, it would apply to task orders and to delivery orders, anything above the simplified acquisition threshold. As it was marked up, it still applies to contracts, but not necessarily to task orders. So that it's interesting to see how that substitute came into being. And then it passed on voice vote out of the House Small Business Committee. So it'll be interesting to see if it actually progresses on. There's a companion bill in the Senate. Does it get attached to the defense authorization bill this year? Does it move as a standalone bill? What happens next with this? Because they seem to find a decent compromise on how to make sure that they preserved how the rule of two was operated for many years now.
Would you think that the removal of the task order provision limits the impact of this, or does it just reflect how procurement actually works today?
It actually reflects how procurement works today. And if you read through other parts of Section 15 of the Small Business Act, they already envision that things like multiple award schedules and task orders didn't need to be set aside. It was at the discretion of the administration. And in the past, we've seen different administrations approach it different ways. The Biden administration said, we're going to set aside task orders unless they're on schedules, and then we're not going to set them aside. The current version of the Trump administration came in and said, no, we're not going to do set asides on task orders. You can voluntarily set aside on task orders, but we're not going to mandate setting aside on task orders. And in fact, the decision to allow voluntary set-asides against schedules came up in the Bush administration when I was at GSA then. So there's been some flexibility that's been built in over the years. And I think that this gets us back to more, the administration gets to make the call on task orders, but we want to make sure that when you're talking about a full contract, that the rule of two continues to apply.
And if the rule of two is codified in law, does that change anything on a daily basis for contracting officers?
Well, it raises some new protest opportunities, possibly, because the way that it's been interpreted so far, it's been a regulatory provision where there's been some discretion to the contracting officer. This would have a statutory backstop on it. And we saw this happen with the Kingdomware case over at the Department of Veterans Affairs, where they had said, you shall set it aside for service-disabled veterans or veteran-owned small businesses before you look at any other set-aside. So does that change? Does this give it's not the same language exactly, but the language that passed for VA gave STVOSBs and VOSBs precedence over Ability One. Would this change that? And I'm not sure it's written in such a way that it would, but that would remain to be seen.
Emily Murphy is Senior Fellow at the George Mason University Baroni Center for Government Contracting and former GSA Administrator. Well, Emily, let's turn our attention from small business to big business and defense. The chairman's mark of the NDAA had some interesting provisions to try to get DoD to speed up acquisition. What's the core shift you see there?
So there is so much in the NDA. I mean, the NDA, Title 8 of the NDA is always my favorite to go in, or Section, the 800 series, because it's where you see that there's some collaboration, there's been some work done, and what is concerning Congress? Where are they responding to what the administration's doing? Where are they trying to, push ahead? What's happening? And this year we see, that we're revisiting some old favorites, like we're looking at acquisition thresholds again and increasing the micro purchase threshold, increasing the simplified acquisition threshold, but also trying to revisit it so that we do that every 3 years rather than every 5 years. An idea that maybe we're not, that we're letting these lag behind too long. Now it'll be interesting to see, does the Senate agree on that provision? But other things where they're saying, we need to be doing things in a more uniform way. We need a contract writing system as the department. That's been a long-standing push. We're not sure we're thrilled with how the defense contract audit agencies are working. We need a review there because are they actually holding us back? Or do we have too many rules? How are we handling other transactions authorities? When do we want to be using those? So all sorts of fun things in there. Even, we revisit LPTA, the lowest price technically acceptable. When can you use it and when can't you use it? All sorts of really interesting provisions in there this year. There are even some small business contracting provisions because there's the subcontracting plan that DoD uses. It's a slightly different one than everyone else uses that's in there. And then you see some real focus on the workforce also. So there's the creation of chief acquisition talent officers. This idea that we really need to be focusing on the acquisition workforce if we're going to get that speed, if we're going to get the results. We're going to actually have proficiency requirements for the acquisition workforce. And we're going to have this not just at the department level, but at each of the services. And we're going to have this, cascade down. There's an idea that I love that we've been, that I was pushing when I was at GSA years ago, to buy consumption-based purchasing of IT services and products, so cloud and AI. How do you have to buy it on a specific category? Do you have to know upfront that I'm buying X amount per month and that's that, and every time we approach that ceiling, we have to go buy more when you're roaming on your cell phone? Or can we actually say we will pay for whatever we use and therefore negotiate a better price? And that in the past, the issue has always been in doing that, it risks triggering the Anti-Deficiency Act. Because if I spent a lot of money in September, maybe did I have enough money in the budget to cover it? And they're saying, well, no, these are ongoing contracts, and we're going to have some predictability, and we can have some not to exceed clauses and things like that in there. But we don't need to be this restrictive on it in a way that we're buying in a very different way than the commercial markets are. So trying to bring that back down. So I've got to give Congressman Rogers and his staff credit. There's a lot of fun stuff in this year's NDAA.
Just going to say your idea of fun might not match with many other people's, but I love it for you.
My family's very glad that someone else will talk to me about acquisition reform. Not just them.
One of the things that seems to come through all of this is that Congress is really focusing on giving program leaders more authority and flexibility. Now, I want to ask you, they say that, but in practice, Congress has not really wanted to leave some decision authority to the Department of Defense. Whenever defense has tried to make some controversial decisions around weapons termination or base closures, Congress wants that flexibility back to them. Do you think they can really go through with this idea of more judgment, more flexibility equals more speed, and therefore go do it?
I think that they are invested in doing it. I think that at the end of the day, and I'm going to quote Tip O'Neill, all politics is local. And so when a decision starts affecting someone's district or their home state, they frequently do want to come in and revisit it. And honestly, we also want members of, if Congress thinks that the administration is making a bad decision, you sort of want them to come in and say, wait a second, I've got a question about this, and revisit it. The question is going to be how often they do that. On something like BRAC, where we got the whole process together, that was a nationwide debate, and we got to a up or down vote on it. But when you get into some other areas, for example, the president earlier this year had a executive order on defense contracting, and it looked at suspending progress payments in some places. And now we're seeing Congress come back in through this legislation and say, wait a second, we're not sure how we feel about that. We don't want to do that. But then other places they're saying, wait, we really want to be, we're on board with this. Let's limit the number of contract clauses. So they, for commercial items, they came in and said, you can't come up, Department of Defense and Department of War may not come up with new clauses for commercial items if they're not in the FAR or DFAR already. So you can use those clauses, but you can only use those clauses. We're not going to go put more special clauses on things, which seems to be in keeping with what the revolutionary FAR overhaul was going towards, but could also be seen as a way of saying, wait, we don't want to start putting we're not going to try to rebuild a separate system of acquisition. The other one that sort of made me laugh is there's a provision in there that says, where are our DFAR clauses? They're saying, we've got a backlog. We've been passing legislation for years now. You haven't delivered DFAR clauses to us. And so we want you to go create a task force that is going to bring in experts from all over the government to help you get those clauses, get those cases written. We want our regulations. So we don't want regulations on one side. We want them on the other. We do what we want you to do what we told you to do first, and then we'll go play with some other stuff.
I've been speaking with Emily Murphy. She's Senior Fellow at the George Mason University Baroni Center for Government Contracting and former GSA Administrator. Emily, thanks as always for your great insights here.
Thank you, Terry. It's always wonderful getting a chance to talk to you.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.